Welcome to The World This Week, the time when I sit back and let a select group of guests set the world to rights. So let's waste no time and introduce this week's gang of four. Christopher Dickey is the foreign editor of the Daily Beast. Good to see you, sir. How are you?
Good to see you.
Have you had a good week?
Yes, a busy week.
Busy week. Well, that's how we like it, because busy usually means you're getting paid, so I hope that's the case. Robert Parsons is France 24's chief foreign editor. Good to see you, sir. We've seen a lot of each other this week because we have lots of busy things to analyse, and tonight, of course, this next hour, no exception. Alyssa Rubin is the Paris bureau chief of the New York Times. We haven't met before, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about all our stories. What's your week been like?
Busy also.
Good.
We've had a fair amount here in France and then even more everywhere else.
That's always good when a journalist says the week's been busy. Anne Baghamer is a journalist at large here in Paris, and I imagine you too have been, well, hard at work.
Hard at work, interpreting France for the world, America for the world. It's been interesting.
Fantastic stuff. Thank you all for being here, because without you, the program doesn't exist. So it's great to see you all. Thank you very much indeed. Now let's start with a very serious subject indeed: the shooting in Florida that resulted in some 17 deaths, pupils and staff at a high school. Shocked the world, of course. The reaction of the surviving teenagers, though, has shaken the corridors of power in Washington to such an extent that Donald Trump is now talking of reviewing who's allowed to buy certain types of guns, increase the scope of background checks, and ban bump stocks. Now, that's the device that converts a semi-automatic weapon into a fully fledged automatic one. Why you'd ever need one of those, I can't imagine. So, is this the start of gun reform that we can believe in? Let's throw that one open to Christopher.
No, it's not. It absolutely is not. In fact, most of what Trump is proposing is stuff that even the National Rifle Association, the insidious lobby that spent $30 million to get him elected, even they basically support the kinds of positions that he's taking. But his main goal is not to achieve passage of any bills, not to change any of the laws, but to seem to be doing something until people forget this event. Yeah. That's the strategy. That's always the strategy of the NRA, and it's Trump's strategy now. Yeah. You say you're going to...
Now is not the time to talk about this. He had to talk about it this time, but he's just finding another strategy to push it down the road.
Sure. Alyssa, do you agree?
Yeah. I think initially he was genuinely, particularly after seeing the bodies of the kids who were injured, the wound is in the hospital. He was genuinely shocked, and he actually had a few sort of more sensible thoughts, but those were rapidly dispelled by conversations with the NRA and with more pro-gun legislators. And he went from talking about a variety of things that at least were a step in the right direction, like the banning of bump stocks.
Which the NRA has said is okay.
Well, they've said it's okay, but it's one of those first steps that it'd be great to see even one. And,
background checks is such a no-brainer as well. You know, nobody can really contest it.
Right. Well, but except the NRA.
Exactly.
And the Congress.
Now we're back to teachers being armed, which is
that is
really
a classic
reaction of the NRA.
Effort to obscure the whole question, because teachers are never going to be armed. Most of them would quit rather than be armed. It's not going to happen. But if you look at the Twitter sphere, it lit up the Twitter sphere. Yeah. Everybody was tweeting about it. Everybody was talking about it. And the idea is that will subside, and then people will go on to the next thing, whatever it is, until the next massacre.
The voice of these children, though, Anne, has been really the persuasive factor, hasn't it, that's sort of pushed towards a different kind of action, I think.
Well, let's put it this way. It's the new factor this time around. This is the time when it's been pointed out that one of the reasons that the NRA has been so successful in grabbing the agenda, it isn't just money. It's the fact that the NRA has you may not agree with it, but they have a positive point that they push every time. And their opposition has tended to be people who are suffering, tend to be victims, tend to be people who are saying no. And it's not as persuasive for many people to see the two sides as equivalent. This time, though, these kids are saying we're not going to be victims. We are going to react now. We're going to react forcefully. And what they're basically saying to their parents' generation, and I would include myself in that, is you guys can't seem to get it together. Every time something like this happens, you do exactly the same thing in exactly the same way, and you expect a different result. You are, by definition, crazy. Well, we're not going to do that. We're going to show a different way. We've got the energy. We don't care. Now, will they end up moving the ball down the field? They have a lot of hurdles to get over. including, as we've mentioned, the NRA, which, to be perfectly honest, they probably would love to see teachers armed. You know why? Because their whole purpose in life is to sell more guns.
It's to get everybody armed.
It's to get everybody armed and to support the gun manufacturers. It's time to stop, in my view, and these kids are doing this now, talking about the money. The kid who put Marco Rubio's back up against the wall and said, will you not take the NRA money? He hit the nail right on the head. It's about money. And the NRA exists to help the gun manufacturers make more. If you arm the teachers in the United States, wow, what a great new market. Why not raise the age of 21? You're going to pick it all up in the, from the teachers.
None of that's
no, it's not going to happen.
That's all bullshit. I mean, it's, if I may say, I mean, not you.
I need to apologise for the use of the word BS, but I know you won't do it again. But,
no. The kids used it. The kids used it, so we can too.
We can too.
Okay, carry on.
Yeah, the kids do it. But the question of sustainability of this momentum that the kids have generated is striking right now. If you look at the Google searches for gun control, if you look at them, the searches after the massacre in Las Vegas that killed 58 people, they go right up and then they go right down.
That was the bump stock one.
Again and again, it goes up and it goes down. This time, it has not gone down. It's gone up and it's continuing to climb. That has to be frightening. But I think the thing that has to be done now is to take these young people who can vote at age 18. Every American citizen can vote at age 18. High school seniors are almost all 18 years old when they get out of school. They'll be 18 by November. They can vote. In Florida, you can register to vote when you're 16, which means if you register now, you'll be ready to dump Trump in 2020. If there is a massive voter registration of young people and they're mobilized the way they were, for instance, in 2008 to get Obama elected, that will scare the hell out of the people who are basically sucking off the NRA tick.
That was one of the other things that astonished me. They were just so articulate.
It's a great sign for democracy, isn't it, to sort of think that more kids will be getting registered and getting interested in politics. It happened in the UK during the last election. Obviously, that played a big role. But the meeting that took place, Alyssa, at the White House, Donald Trump with survivors, would you ever have thought he would have actually done that, been up for doing that?
I think he's been coached to do that, and he's learned that it really redounds badly when he doesn't make some effort to show feeling for victims. I mean, people are still talking about him throwing the paper towels at the sort of poor stranded Puerto
that
Ricans.
Did look ridiculous, didn't it?
Yeah, and so I do feel like he actually listened to some advisor and acted on it.
Well, he had a note card that said the last thing on the note card was, "I hear you."
Right.
In case he forgot to say that.
Right. Well, but at least he did it, as you say. But it's the only thing that matters is the follow through, because otherwise it will. There's no question it'll happen again. It happens over and over. And
but he has a reputation for saying one thing, doing another, making one promise, breaking that promise, saying something happens, then it doesn't happen.
Right. Well, he managed not to make a promise of what he would do.
Okay.
And so I think that's always telling.
So in terms of... Go ahead.
No, but you make a good point that he threw out a whole bunch of ideas and seemingly to see which one would stick to the wall. Let's arm the teachers. Let's raise the age. Let's do this. Let's give the teachers bonuses. He added a little codicil onto that. A lot of people are throwing out a lot of ideas now. This is also something that happens after a tragedy of this sort. And in the heat of the moment, people want a fix. I mean, in the meeting, I think it was at the White House, one of the fathers or one of the kids actually said, you got to fix this. You got to fix this. People want to see something now. Arguably, right now is the worst time to try to make policy on this extremely emotional and complicated issue, because everybody's got a fix and nobody's listening to anybody else. But one of the smartest commentaries I saw was someone who was proposing, for once, let's not lurch from one idea to another. Let's sit back, let's take stock, and let's have hearings. Let's have congressional hearings on the subjects of school shootings and gun safety. And let the two sides bring their best arguments, and let's actually listen to them. Because you know what? As difficult as it may be for some people to say it or hear it, there are good arguments on both sides. The mental health argument is a good argument. It's not the only argument, but it is a good one. It's as good as no more assault weapons, no more huge magazines, no more bump stocks.
Of course, Donald Trump's made it easier to.
And the only reason to have an AR-15 real reason to have an AR-15 is either you're going to shoot paper targets that look like people, or you're going to shoot people that look like people. AR-15 is not a hunting weapon. It's nothing except a weapon of war. There is no reason to arm the civilian population with AR-15s.
I'm not saying take it off the table. I'm saying put that on the table with everything else.
I'm saying, if you keep saying, Anne, this is so complicated, let's have hearings, let's talk about it. What we need to do is focus on one clear issue, assault rifles. They have been banned in the United States before. They were banned until 2004. They can do it again. There's no reason not to do that. If you put it into the whole thing where we start arguing endlessly about the nuances of the Second Amendment and the question of whether open carry and closed carry is good, whether you can have a 5-shot magazine or a 30-shot magazine.
Yeah, you'll go round and round in circles.
You'll go round and round in circles.
Well, I'm suggesting democracy, aren't you? That's it. It's a question of giving people a voice, I suppose. But
I am.
But I think the NRA's
take
had
your
quite
point.
a good voice.
Take your point.
I think you should run for office, Chris.
I think so, too.
Well,
Is this an announcement?
You get 4 votes around here, no problem.
I'm going to run in South Carolina. I figure, if Trump can be president of the United States, I can be governor of South Carolina.
That would be interesting. Thank you very much indeed. The situation, of course, continues on the issue of gun reform, and we'll keep across all developments for you. Let's move on to our next story this week, and it is an ongoing story, of course. The state of play in Syria. It's very disturbing indeed. Robert Parsons has filled us in on this one already today. The massacre taking place at eastern Ghouta in the Damascus suburbs. The rebel-held enclave has been under constant bombardment this week. Assad's troops and Russian aircraft responsible for that. These images just give you just a very short look at what's been happening and how people are suffering there. The scale of the damage is shocking. Death toll at least over 600. Meanwhile, at the border between Syria and Turkey, another conflict boils over. Turkey's border incursion against the Syrian Kurds is now including pro-Assad fighters. Bashar al-Assad responding to a cry for help from the YPG, that's the other name for the Syrian Kurds, and dispatching his troops to Afrin. The death toll there, sadly, is rising and is expected to continue to rise. And can I just throw it open to you all by saying it is a complete humanitarian mess what's going on in Syria. And the depressing thing, and Rob, you were talking to me about this earlier, is that there's really no end in sight. The UN's meeting, at present, to try to broker some sort of a ceasefire. But are you optimistic that this is going to happen?
No. Something may come out of the UN Security Council meeting today. There may be a resolution that's agreed on if the Russians can somehow persuade the others to accept their terms. But realistically, if an agreement is reached, it's going to be an agreement that's going to be broken very quickly. And what we've seen over the last 5 days and before that months and years is going to continue. Perhaps not the same degree of massacre and slaughter that we've seen over the last 5 days, but the idea of the regime is to grind the opposition fighters inside eastern Ghouta, as in Idlib and elsewhere, into the dust. And until they've achieved that aim, they're not going to stop. And as long as they have the support of Russia and Iran, it's going to be very difficult for anybody else to stop them.
Alisa?
No, I think that's right. I think there are very different things happening in eastern Ghouta and in Afrin. There's the situation across the north of Syria is one in which you really have a proxy struggle for power, in which you have Russia, Iran backing the Bashar Assad's forces. And then you have the Kurds, who have been rather ambivalent about which side they're on, but they're certainly against Turkey. So they're sort of right now working with Assad's forces, but Assad's forces themselves are a little bit flickering from one loyalty to another. So it's a proxy war in which people are changing sides in an already very confused situation. And I was just in much further eastern Syria recently, and they're very worried about the Afrin effect moving towards them and even into Iraq, because this is an area without a border. I was able to drive over the border without any trouble, with no passport, no visa, nothing.
Well, we've seen another complication in that area that you've just been talking about, because whereas in Afrin you see the regime forces and the Kurds, the YPG, fighting together against the Turks, the eastern part of Syria,
Right.
you see exactly the opposite happening with the YPG as part of the Syrian Democratic Forces together with the coalition fighting against the regime.
Right. And also, well, especially fighting, supposedly cleaning up ISIS, but it's a little unclear. There doesn't seem to be much ISIS
It's that
left
phrase,
there.
cleaning up, which is very chilling, isn't it?
Right. Well, it is, especially because they seem to have everybody gathered. All the survivors of Raqqa are in these camps, which are sort of almost like little cities of Islamic State people who say they are things like cooks, but it seems unlikely they had hundreds of cooks or hundreds of sweepers.
Indeed, the situation now, obviously, it's difficult to see an actual solution coming up out of, well, the next few days, the next few weeks, something that would just continue.
Days, weeks, months, years. I don't see any solution for a very long time.
Turkey's position, because Alyssa was mentioning about the border being, I think the word people use is porous, isn't it? Basically, it doesn't exist. But Turkey's position, I mean, talk about ambivalence and talk about what Turkey's done. Going over the border, let's say it is a border, into Syria, it's an invasion, isn't it?
Well, yes, but Turkey's position has always been pretty clear. It's the surround that's been a little foggy. Turkey's position is that the YPG is an extension of the PKK. Technically, the YPG denies that, but they fly banners of the leader of the PKK. They clearly are part of the PKK. And Turkey says the PKK, in fact, the United States and Europe say the PKK is a terrorist organization that's been fighting in Turkey for a very long time. So the Turkish position is when we, the Turks, talk about terrorism, we talk about the PKK. You can talk about ISIS, you can talk about Islamic terrorists, you can talk about all that, but our big concern is the PKK. That has been the position of the Turkish government consistently throughout the Syrian war.
I need to pause you. We can come back to this in part two, but in a very short break, these people are going to talk about everything. Short break, back in a moment.
Revisited. Presented by Stuart Norval.
The election of Adama Barrow in 2016 filled Gambians with hope. After 22 years of autocratic rule, Yahya Jammeh was beaten in the elections. His expulsion from the country drew a curtain on a past stained by imprisonment, murder and corruption. But will the new Gambia, promised by the president, live up to expectations?
Revisited on France 24 and France24.com. French Connections, presented by Florence Villemino.
They're known for their cuisine and saying hello with a kiss. They only work 35 hours per week, when they're not on strike, that is. How true are these cliches about France? Every week, Florence Villemino tears apart stereotypes. Join us for insight into French culture and current events to understand what makes the French so unique.
French Connections on France 24 and France24.com.
Welcome back. You're watching live from Paris. The second part of The World This Week is coming up after the world headlines. 6 days at eastern Ghouta under constant bombardment by Assad's forces and the Russians. The Security Council of the UN is meeting at this precise moment in time. We're expecting a vote over the next 2 hours. We'll bring you the result of that as we get it. A surprise, said our correspondent. Donald Trump announcing that the US embassy in Israel is to be opened sooner than had been announced. It's now scheduled to be opened in May, a move to coincide with the 70th anniversary of the independence of Israel. The Palestinians describing this as unacceptable. The US is slapping sanctions on more than 50 vessels, shipping companies and trade businesses that linked to North Korea. Donald Trump is calling this the largest ever set of new sanctions against not just Pyongyang, but against any country in the world. Part two of The World This Week. Our gang of four ready to get their teeth into all the big issues that have unfolded over the past 7 days. They are Christopher Dickey, foreign editor of the Daily Beast. Good to see you, sir. Robert Parsons, France 24's chief foreign editor. Alyssa Rubin is the Paris bureau chief of the New York Times. Thanks for being with us. And Anne Bagameri, journalist at large here in Paris. Thank you for joining us. We were talking before the break about the situation in Syria. Christopher, you're about to make a point when I cut you off in your prime.
And see, I lost the point.
I was about to make a point.
Actually, Rob was about to make a point.
Go ahead, Rob. Go ahead then, Rob.
No, what I was going to say is, though I agree with the drift of what Christopher was saying, it's not strictly true to say that Turkey's position in Syria has remained unchanged over the last 7 years. Their position on Assad has flip-flopped backwards and forwards, and their position on the Kurds has changed as well. At one point, they were negotiating with the Kurds, specifically with the PKK. That is what's at the heart of the problem with both the PKK and the YPG. Until the Turks get round to sorting out their problem with the Kurds, these sort of issues are going to go on and on forever. That's the point.
Well, yes, and Erdogan, in fact, cynically restarted the war with the PKK because he thought it would help him get elected, and it did.
Yeah.
And it did.
I'm just, as we're talking PKK, as I understand it, they're not looking for independence. They're just looking for rights and
greater autonomy, more
the right to sort of live in Turkey and not be
it's a pretty radical group. I mean, it's been described as Stalinist.
Sure. And obviously, as you say, recognised as a territory.
You have to say, too, that it's been the area that they control has been the most... Sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's quite all right.
Go on, The area that they control has been the most stable and unviolent
in
party
Syria.
In Syria, yeah.
And I think that the YPG is while it is on the one hand very much allied with the PKK, it is geographically more focused on Syria. And at some point, they're going to have to make a choice if they might be able to get some level of the kind of autonomy that they've enjoyed the last few years, but only if they sever their ties. And it seems they'll never quite do that. So that's part of what perpetuates the tension between Turkey and the YPG sort of indefinitely.
What was the U.S. role in this border force?
Well, yeah, the U.S.
Because that was the sort of thing. I mean, that's what kicked it all off, wasn't it?
Part of it.
Part of it. What was the U.S. role in that? Because obviously then Rex Tillerson turns up in Ankara and says, "Wow, we weren't actually planning to build this great force along your border. It wasn't actually happening." But of course, the Kurds saying, "Yeah, we were going to do that."
Well, I think that they want to ensure that Turkey doesn't let in more Islamic State fighters. For a long time, Turkey was letting pretty much free access to all the Islamic State fighters. All the ones from Europe. Most people went through Turkey without very much problem, and it wasn't like it was a secret where they were crossing. I mean, maybe exactly where, you'd have to spend a little time. But, I mean, after all, there were journalists who found their way there and spies and everything else. So it's not, it was certainly possible. So I think the United States did not want any Islamic State people leaving that way or any more people coming that way. And they they didn't feel that the YPG was capable of fighting they obviously couldn't fight the Turks on their own, and they couldn't plug the border entirely on their own. And
a situation now where Bashar al-Assad is riding to the rescue of the Syrian Kurds. It just kind of... the twists and turns in this story are crazy, aren't they?
The thing about Assad, and it was true of his father, too, the great lesson that they have to teach the world is patience. They basically wait. If they can hang on, even if it's by their fingernails, they will see their enemies fall, either in elections or in revolutions, or one way or the other, or their enemies will decide, maybe we should work with them, maybe we have to work with them. That is exactly that's been the long game of Assad all along. That's why early in the revolution, when it was a popular revolution and people were actually going into the streets, braving the guns without having anything to fight back with, what did he do? He released all the Islamist political prisoners from prison. Why did he do that? So that he could say, it's me or the Islamists. It's me or Al-Qaeda. Yeah. That was the game from the beginning, and it has continued to be the game. And the Russians bought into that absolutely 100%. Not philosophically, not even politically, cynically, because they knew that would be a way to keep Assad in power. He's incredibly patient. He knows if he hangs on long enough, he'll be the only game left in town. Yeah. And the more you describe the chaos in the entire country, the more you confirm that analysis.
Indeed.
And the Kurds in Afrin have no choice. It's the only deal they're being offered. The Americans aren't going to help them in Afrin.
Even in places like Manbij, even in the area where you are, a lot of the administration, the actual bureaucratic administration, the schools funding for bureaucrats, that kind of thing, has been taken over by the regime. It isn't actually the YPG that's running the bureaucratic infrastructure to the extent that it's left in a lot of those places.
And in fact, they've even said that in reference to France, France said that they wanted French Islamic State prisoners to be vetted in Syria and tried in Syria in case they had done crimes there. And they claimed they would indeed be able to do that because there was a judiciary of some sort. Well, whose judiciary was it? It was the regime's. Yeah.
Well, and there's a pretty sordid record of American collusion with Assad over the years. I mean, during the height of the rendition program back in the late 90s, and especially after 9/11, there were any number of people who were captured by the CIA or allied U.S. groups and turned over to the Syrians for the kind ministrations of the Syrian interrogators, which Amnesty has written about endlessly. It's absolutely horrible. But the U.S. wanted the information that Assad's people could give them. So there was a CIA presence in Damascus at that point.
I mean, and the other thing, too, about the situation in Afrin is that the regime is much more worried about Turkey and the Free Syrian Army than it is about the Kurds. A deal can easily be done with the Kurds over time.
And betrayed, too.
And betrayed, precisely.
Expediency.
Well, the last thing they want is the Free
isn't it?
Syrian Army getting into Afrin.
And they don't want the Turks to go in and occupy a large portion of
Their
Syria.
country. Yeah.
So that's thoroughly depressing on the border. And it's even more depressing, as you've been telling us, the situation in that Damascus suburb.
Yeah.
And no solution likely?
No,
Do
I don't
we
think
think
so, no.
this time tomorrow or in the next few hours we'll be
Well,
talking
there might
about
be
the
a
UN
temporary
finding
truce,
some
but,
sort of a ceasefire? Do you think it'll happen?
No.
No?
No, we've been around this table talking about this issue for years, and it's quite true what you say that Assad has played the long game, and look who if you can declare a winner in this scenario, which is difficult to do when you've got 3 different wars, all of them unresolved and very murky, going on. Even ISIS isn't over. I mean, they have less land than they did before, but there are little outcroppings. Assad seems to be the winner.
The survivor.
The survivor.
Well, to survive is to win.
Is the real winner Vladimir Putin?
I don't know. We'll see about that. This was a risk for Putin, and Assad is not the best ally to have.
No, I agree.
Well, and they're still in there, and they would have been nice for them, I think, if they could have gone in, gotten a decisive win, and gotten their folks out.
It was interesting. Putin was in Syria in December, claiming it's all over. We've won. We're getting out.
Yeah, well, and now he's sent in his top shot, his best fighters ever.
Yeah.
His best, the
aircraft.
ever. Yeah. But Eastern Ghouta is going to be horrific because the whole doctrine of the Soviets, of the Russians, of the Syrians, and of the Iranians is not to go in and fight house to house, but to flatten the whole area. Eastern Ghouta is going to look like Grozny did during the Chechen War.
It's the same recipe.
This is the way they did it. This is what they did in Aleppo. And that is exactly what they intend to do in Ghouta. And if they had the chemical weapons that they were using in 2013, if they had kept those, they'd be using those now. They don't care what it takes. They are now going to clear out Eastern Ghouta. And if there are indeed, as people say, 350,000 people there, and given that at least since 2012, the rebel forces there have been digging in, it's going to be not a quick fight, but it's going to be a very, very bloody and ugly.
It's very like Grozny. Exactly the same situation. The Russian forces surrounded the city. They bombarded it with artillery and rocket fire. They bombed it from the air. They said to the rebels inside, you can go out with your families. And if you don't, we're going to flatten you. They said, no, we're not going to leave. And they flattened them.
Francois Delattre, the French ambassador to the UN, said if we don't act now, it's going to be, the end of the United Nations. Is that moment nigh, the end of the UN? Is this a point where, it all becomes futile? It's got no power. It looks like the worst kind of toothless tiger?
Was anybody really expecting the UN to solve this problem? That's my question. I mean, is this an impossible task that they certainly can't do? And That's my question.
Okay, so it's unfair to actually judge them as a player in this game. Is that the issue?
No. Well, the power of veto is the big issue, and people have been talking about reform of the UN almost for as long as it's existed. We've had 11 vetoes from Russia over the course of this war. We've had American vetoes over Israel for as long as anybody can remember as well. And the UN looks powerless. But at the moment, we don't have anything as an alternative to replace it.
I think the only thing the UN can still achieve potentially is some sort of humanitarian temporary ceasefire that allows something to get in for 24 hours, 48 hours. But that seems to be about the limit of...
Well, but you remember, by end of last summer, early fall, the whole business of the de-escalation zones. This was held up by the Trump administration as a perfect example of how you can work with the Russians to try and tone things down and diffuse the conflict. Well, the main de-escalation zone was Eastern Ghouta.
Absolutely.
So
and also Idlib, the same pattern is beginning to happen there as well. Yeah.
Okay, well, on that fairly
happy
depressing note,
yes.
let's move on to France unveiling plans to reform its immigration laws. Gérard Collomb, the Interior Minister, with a reputation as Emmanuel Macron's enforcer, outlined the plans to the National Assembly. They would make it quicker to hear a case, make it easier to admit a young person in need. But migrant advocacy groups are saying this is merely smoke and mirrors, trying to hide a good old-fashioned clampdown on those in need. France has never been at ease, has it, with its issue of bringing people into the country. If you believe some people talking in France, the place is overrun by migrants, but it's not at all the case. So where does France stand with its migrants, with immigrants, with people coming to stay? We're all not from France, so I suppose we're examples of people coming into the country and settling and doing a job. But the people we're talking about, of course, are those coming from places at risk, under threat. If they go back, they might be at threat of, well, death, at least, maybe something even worse.
Well, Alyssa's colleague Adam Nossiter's just done a piece on this, so I will replay much of what I've learned from reading that. But at least on the surface, these reforms this new law is meant to be a way of separating the economic migrants, those who are coming to France to take advantage of the still rather generous welfare system compared to what they had at home, versus the true politically persecuted migrants who really are at risk of death and were at risk of death, and that's why they're here. Now, the big question, and it's being posed even by members of M. Macron's party, La République En Marche, is is this, in fact, something that just obscures a desire by Emmanuel Macron to grab to take over the issue of clamping down on immigration from political rivals, notably the National Front and Marine Le Pen? Is this something that, in fact, is meant to please people who want to see fewer migrants, but also chart a course where he says, well, we're not going to turn away anybody who is truly, truly in fear of their life. We just don't want people who want our benefits. There are a lot of questions about whether what he's proposed will actually achieve what the stated aims are. I mean, for example, he has, and this is one of the more controversial moves, this proposed law would double the minimum stay in detention after someone was refused asylum from 45 days to 90 days. And that is thought to, this is a terrible way to put it, but improve the quality of the deportations, to make sure that people get deported under the conditions that will really get them out of the country, keep them out of the country. Well, it's a great idea, except that back in 2011, the Sarkozy government did something the same thing. The maximum limit in the detention was 30 days. They increased it to 45, and the number of deportations actually went down. So more people actually stayed in the country. So that time frame actually served to help keep people in the country. So that's just one element of this rather many-headed hydra of a plan, and already there's evidence that it's not going to achieve what it was set out to do. So the question really then does become, what is it designed to do?
Alyssa?
I think Anne covered it very well, except that one point to add is a lot of people are coming not for the benefits per se. They get pleasure benefits in many other countries, including in some of the Scandinavian countries and even Germany, but because there are more jobs here. If they're coming from sub-Saharan Africa, they're eager to do any kind of work. In fact, work that often the French don't want to do, or jobs the French don't want to do. And so that is their reason for coming, but they are seen, they add to the numbers of people who arguably don't look like they're French to French people, and they also, many of them are obviously of color, but they also add to the impression of there being more and more foreigners. Now, in fact, I don't think that that's particularly true. There hasn't been anything like the vast influx in Germany. It's really
or in Italy.
Or
the figures
Italy.
don't compare.
It is thousands, but it's 19,000, 20,000. It's not a million people, and that's a very big difference.
Yeah.
And that would seem to support the impression that this is mainly a political move. It's to grab the issue rather than to actually effect change in France's immigration. But there will be changes. But the main goal is to say you don't have to vote National Front in order to get tough on immigration.
So the problem in France, as you're saying, it's not that there are huge numbers. The problem is with people who are French, but who are second and third generation children of immigrants who haven't been assimilated in French society, who are still excluded from French society, despite all the nominal equality and fraternity and freedom that you have. And that is the medium and long-term problem. And I think there is a concern that if you continue to let in a large number of economic migrants, even if they're taking these jobs initially, once you have the second generation and the third generation, how is France going to assimilate those people, integrate them into the society? On paper, nobody does it better than France. You have, the idea is you learn French, you take a few tests, you live here a certain amount of time, and you are French, and they don't even recognize legally your color. There's no census in France, as we all know, but maybe the viewers don't. There's no census in France that keeps track of color, of religion, of all the things that we have so many numbers about in the United States. Those don't exist in France because everybody is equal. But the fact is, if you come from what they call the 9-3, the 93rd postal district, you're starting as a loser right there. If your name is Mohammed and you come from there, you're even worse off. And if you show up for an interview and you're black, you're even worse off.
Yeah.
And everybody knows that, and they haven't been able to resolve it.
But you can't blame Macron for trying to find a solution to the problem. 63% of French people say they have a problem with migration. Now, there were 100,000 asylum seekers in France last year. That's nothing by comparison with Germany, I agree. But it's still, as far as French people are concerned, the perceived problem exists. If you're Macron and you're watching what's happened over the last couple of years in Germany, you're going to want to do something about it because you're fearing that you're going to be out of a job if you don't. So
and as I was saying,
the electoral impulse is clearly there. He's got to do something. Sure. And at the same time, just to add one other thing, I found interesting, not very long ago, Macron was in Ghana, and I listened to the Ghanaian president making exactly the same points that Macron was making, saying, we don't want people to leave Ghana. We need them here. What we need is inward investment into Ghana to make the success of our economy. That, I think, is probably the direction he would most like to go. There is absolutely no sign, unfortunately, that anybody wants to invest on a sufficient scale to make that work.
Let me move us on to our final topic, because we have no time for it at all, but we're going to snatch the time to do it. It's about doping at the Winter Olympics, which disappointed me because I wanted sports stars to be clean and obviously to have a good reputation. And the thing that I want to ask you before we move on has been the famous case, of course, is the Russian curler who gets done for doping, taking meldonium, the same substance. He's on the brush like that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even alcohol.
How can you enhance your performance in curling by taking a drug? That's what I want you
It
guys to try and
wasn't
answer
vodka.
for me.
I've wrestled with that one, as it were. I've never come to a conclusion.
I grew
on
up
that.
watching curling. I grew up in Detroit, and we
Okay.
watched Canadian television. So curling on the CBC was, Saturday afternoon. You have nothing better.
There is
to
a
do.
skill.
Oh, absolutely.
No,
And
it's very
this year
skillful.
curling has been kind of a marquee sport. There have been a lot of articles about the way the curlers dress, about how fit they are. You'd think this would be kind of a bowling body that you would have to have, because this is all you. No, they're actually quite buff and quite fit.
So the brush is good.
So a few steroids might help.
So now that curling is, if you like, a marquee sport, a real sport with cool uniforms and buff, maybe there's a calendar in the works. Naturally, you're going to have doping. Of course.
And you look at, well, there's two things. The
stakes are much
you look
higher.
You look at him and his wife. I didn't look at them until they were having to give back their bronze medal, but you look at them and they're incredibly attractive. They're a beautiful couple. Of course, they're going to be stars, curling stars. Who'd have thought? But too bad they couldn't do it without drugs. Yeah. But the other problem, of course, is that they're Russians. And the Russians are under incredibly close scrutiny, and they also, clearly at Sochi, pulled out all the stops in order to drug anybody and everybody in order to win as many medals as possible, and they're paying for it this time.
So can sports stars be clean? That's the question. I'm looking around. I'm getting no responses, but, I think we've come to the point where...
I think you were looking for an upbeat topic to end on. I think you failed. I'm
My nephew's
sorry.
a
It's hard
sports
to
star. He's
do.
clean.
But, we can be just as depressing about this as we can be about Syria and guns and what was the other topic we discussed? Oh, yes,
Immigration
and
as
France.
well.
Yeah, sorry.
But also the drug issue has become so complicated. It makes even Syria look simple. It's caffeine, for instance. They don't know what to do about caffeine. Caffeine is stronger than a lot of the banned drugs. But are they going to tell people they can't have coffee?
You take a cold cure,
the
that
Italian
can
team,
get you disqualified as well, a cold cure. We will leave you to consider the doping subject. Media Watch is coming up next. Media Watch means Emma James. Emma James here to bring us a look at, everything and anything that we've been talking about. Over to you.
Yes, indeed. Well, starting with the online debate about gun control. It's been going on, obviously, since that shooting in Florida, and it's showing no signs of abating, largely, of course, because of what the US president is now proposing. A lot of people seem to think that he is still very much being controlled by the National Rifle Association, including the cartoonist Michael DeAdder. This is his take on the situation. You've got Donald Trump saying, yes, master, and Wayne LaPierre, the head of the NRA, saying, don't give in to the temptations from the anti-gun elites. Now, you might have thought that the fact that the armed deputy on duty at Parkland School not going in to face the gunman might give him pause for thought when it comes to actually arming teachers, which is one of his suggestions. However, after reiterating support for that plan, he then went on to make some comments about the officer who has since resigned. Take a look at what he had to say.
He didn't have the courage or something happened, but he certainly did a poor job. There's no question about that. He was there for 5 minutes. For 5 minutes. They didn't react properly under pressure, or they were cowards.
Saying he didn't have the courage, he was there for 5 minutes, he could have done something, he didn't, basically saying he's a coward.
He did actually use that word at the very end of the clip there. Yes, the word coward came into it. It does seem a little harsh because I don't think any of us know how we would act in that situation. Now, it does, a lot of people sharing this particular phrase. It's been accredited here to Wayne LaPierre. I'm sure he wasn't the first person to say it. The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And lots of people online really believe that this example in Florida is proof positive, if you like, that that's just not the case, that you have to be more realistic about this. This gentleman says a trained good guy with a gun wanted no piece of a madman with an AR-15. But you expect 10th grade biology teacher Mr. O'Shaughnessy, who took a weekend gun class, to handle his business. And it is a very, very tricky subject. Even conservatives, John Ziegler, very much a Trump-critical conservative, it has to be said, says, as the husband of a gun-owning wife who is a public school teacher, Trump's rant about the magic of arming teachers, which he used to be against, is freaking delusional. Lots of the gun lobby, though, point towards this particular gentleman. You may remember the church shooting in Texas, where the gunman, having carried out his shooting, was then hit by this gentleman, who was wielding an AR-15, one of the rifles that we've heard so much about. But it's worth pointing out that where teachers are already furnished with guns, as in this school in Texas, Argyle High School, they are actually packing, as it says in this article, handguns. And a teaching assistant is quoted here as saying, hopefully it will make them think twice. But if you think about the reality of actually being accurate enough with a handgun to take out somebody who's carrying an AR-15, you do start to see the real problems. And then lots of teachers reacting to this one too. As a teacher, I knocked myself out headbutting a ceiling pretending to be a particle, star jumping off a desk. He set his arm on fire, he's burned his ear listening if gas was coming out of a Bunsen. And he says at the bottom there, please don't give me a gun.
The idea of arming teachers, it just seems to me completely crazy.
To teachers, it seems crazy.
It's insane, yeah.
It's a distraction.
Yeah. I mean, imagine if something's going on and the teacher has a gun and you've been called to the scene as a policeman. You armed yourself. You're not going to be sure whether the teachers are there defending the kids or attacking the kids.
Right.
My favorite argument was, if guns make you safer, why don't they allow them inside the U.S. Capitol? If guns make you safer, why can't you carry them around the President of the United States?
Yeah.
If guns make you safer, why can't you do any of those things? Because guns don't make you safer. And AR-15s really don't make you safer.
And just to finish up on this, one final tweet from a gentleman who has had US Army training in these kind of scenarios. He said, when you arrive at a situation and both good guys and bad guys are armed, they're not wearing signs telling you who's the good, who's the bad.
Right.
I'm 100% positive, he says, that arming teachers is the wrong answer.
Emma James, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to our guests, Christopher Dickey, Robert Parsons, Alyssa Rubin, great to meet you, and Anne Bagger-Mary, nice to see you, Anne. Thank you for watching this programme, The World This Week. Stay with us, more to come here on France 24.